Good morning, everyone. We'll just wait a few seconds for the room to fill up, and then we'll get started. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the PMA-CIBC Summit Series. Today is episode 5 of season 3, and the last episode before we break for the summer. Thank you to everyone in the audience today and in the industry for such strong support to keep this program fresh with new topics and discussions each month. Before we get started with our program, we acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is also now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, we give our respect to its first inhabitants. Because our audience this morning is national, if you're joining us from outside of the GTA, I encourage you to learn more about the traditional territories where we all live, learn, and work, especially during this week of Indigenous people and the month of June. So welcome, my name is Chris Markovic, and on behalf of PMA Brethour, CIBC, our title sponsor, and our media partner, McEwitt, we are thrilled to have you all join us. I will quickly pass the mic over to Andy, who will give us a brief market update. Then I will come back and introduce today's topic. Andy?
Thank you so much, Chris. Great to be with you all this morning. Let me try to be as positive as possible in these tumultuous and times of turmoil. It's a really quite remarkable. I know last month we called it Who Shut the Lights Out? I'm going to rephrase that to pass me the dimmer, because it's just a little bit brighter, a little clearer, I think, as we come into this period at the end of June into early July. I'll get rid of the good news first. Announced this morning, inflation in Canada at 7.7%, 9.1% in the UK, 8.7% in the US. These are the highest levels since the early 1980s. And for those of you who are around then, like I was, we experienced, of course, interest rate movement to fight inflation, cracking 20% at 21.5%. I was so delighted to be the first one on my block with a 21% mortgage. It's an amazing period. And what I think has happened is actually these dramatic changes, particularly just this week with the Federal Reserve in the US putting interest rates up 75 basis points in one hit. Bank of Canada, 250 basis points back to back. And we can expect more. July the 13th, Bank of Canada is expected to move at least 50, might go 75, because they've got to keep that spread against the US rate to protect the Canadian dollar. So we're going to be in for a bit of a whack here again, July 13th, and the US Federal Reserve comes just a week after. So we'll see where that goes. But predictable, continuing, dramatic, and aggressive rate moves. This is far off what had been predicted or talked about last fall or even in the spring. Right up until March, we were talking about smaller, slower increments. But inflation just completely at this moment now entrenched and perhaps in some ways out of control. And as a result, our federal banking communities here, US and in Europe, hard hitting on the interest rate path. This has been a shock to the system. These kinds of rapidity of change causes a shock. And when we're dealing with a generational pattern here of a buyer or a consumer who has never seen rates in this level or this rapidity of change for the last 20 years, it's a generational shock. And as a result, the consumer kind of pulled back. And so the investor a little bit kind of reviewing clearly in May through early parts of June, really pulled back the market. You can see that in terms of absorption levels everywhere, off, almost 35% in resale market, over 40% on the new home market. And so the consumer put on the brakes. And in the period of this last 90 days, I don't think I have seen Although Jeff Grayhurst argued with me the other day that, Andy, you forgot 1989 was the same. Well, it may have been. I just thought that prices move off very slowly in that recessionary period of the early 90s. In this case, we've had an equal and opposite reaction to the shock of the rapidity of interest rate change. And what's happened is a rather rapid movement downward in prices, as much as 20% in suburban 905 detached housing. That was the frothiest. That was the area that had moved the most dramatically. And we've had a very immediate response to it. Not so much on high rise, and it's a bit of a tale of two cities here. The high rise market was not nearly as frothy through the first quarter of this year. And we thought initially, and in our conversations of a month ago, we thought we'd see that first quarter froth come off the market. It clearly has already happened in 905. It has not happened in high rise. And I think what the story is really to the investor is a professional investor, not a speculator. These are not, this is an investor building a portfolio for retirement or building a portfolio for wealth appreciation. And it is not a speculator flipping product. We did have some of that in the low rise market. We did have obviously some of that in high rise, but that speculative influence is now dissipating completely. What you're seeing is a long-term view on the high-rise market. A 4 to 5 year delivery on product means I'll skip this blip. It'll be a total different world. Benjamin Tall suggested 24 months from now, we may see Bank of Canada rate back to around the 2-point level. So that's an interesting kind of scenario over this next little while. What it does mean is that we've got this very turbulent, uncertain months ahead. These shocks to the system create uncertainty. Uncertainty leads to inaction, and that's the kind of sense that we're having. So the world kind of pulls back, and the development industry's pulled back too, and looks at projects and say, well, just pause for a moment. Let's just see where we're going. Now that constricts supply even further, which is a bit compounding to the fundamentals of the business at the moment. All our fundamentals remain unchanged. Immigration still continuing very, very strong. Supply extremely tight in most markets, except for resale listing supply jumping dramatically, and it'll continue to rise. This is a good thing. It'll bring a market back into balance. But on the new home side, it's very, very, very tight supply issue, both high rise and low rise. So, and with a continuing push on the demand side from the constant levels of immigration. So what I expect that will happen is that this may be more hopeful than it is reality. Q1 shows us almost at a point of GDP and negative growth rate, which is very interesting, so that we now in the second quarter may in fact technically already be in recession. You'll have to watch unemployment rates actually will be the trigger. That over time will slow this movement in rates. And what I think we're going to experience is this shocking levels of rate movement now, and that in the next several months, probably by fall, you'll see some stability. And we might actually see a market flip back as strongly as it turned off. In other words, the equal opposite reaction to a market could be very, very typical. The unpredictable elements are things like Ukraine-Russian war, of course, the inability to control inflationary expenditures, and the underlying price of oil, which is really impacting inflation overall. So those are the unpredictable elements heading into fall. But I think that from a real estate perspective, I can't help but think, and I'll conclude with these remarks, that I was invited to speak at the Land Economist AGM at the RCYC last week, and I hadn't been there in years. And here I am on Toronto's waterfront looking back at this great city, and I counted 22 cranes on the horizon, and I just couldn't help but think this almost Wizard of Oz-like community I looked upon as the night lights came on, and how incredibly beautiful and spectacular this city is, how incredible this is a place to work, play, and enjoy an amazing lifestyle, both from retail to entertainment to raising a family. It's an amazing city. Unlike many in the entire world, where 54% of our community of nearly 9 million around the Golden Horseshoe are from somewhere else. and we've proven that through tolerance and freedom, we can have a great, great place to live. So when Microsoft, grabs 4 floors at the downtown high-rise office building for their new national headquarters, when I went by on the tender out from RCYC and saw this great big N on a building, I said, "What's that?" They said, "That's Netflix Studios," and it was 3 football fields. I went, "Oh my goodness, I didn't even know that was there." And I said, this city is just a remarkable place. So we're going to go through an adjustment here. The adjustment could be a bit shocking. The ultimate movement on price may be more variable than we think, because we really sung a frothy story through the pandemic and afterward. And so, but it is a blip. It's a blip on the horizon, and we'll have to find ways to adjust. Now, part of this adjustment is in housing supply. And I've been preaching this one for a long, long time, that affordability has to be driven by a massive increase in the supply side, and particularly 905. And we've got a fantastic panel here this morning that's going to talk about that affordability issues and the supply side of this marketplace, because we can stabilize the land price supply market by increasing the underlying allocation of land for development actually reasonably quickly. It's a real challenge. We've got a government for the first time in many years on our side. And I think that, and therefore on the consumer side. And I think that the job ahead is massively challenging, but you've got a great panel this morning that's going to take you there and give you those answers. Some of them have already been developed in Bill 109, but I'll stop there and move on and pass it back to Chris.
Thanks, Andy. So like Andy was saying, today we're going to deep dive on Bill 109, which is the New Homes for Everyone Act, by doing it in a free-form conversation as opposed to a question and answer. And we've developed essentially 4 themes that we feel as an industry needs to be addressed, and what we need to do to stand up the bill moving forward. In other words, what's next? And those 4 themes for this morning are a discussion around supply chain issues and today's inflationary climate and pressure. 2, talking a little bit around the talent gap, and it's not just the trades, it's construction development consultants and staff at the planning desk and in the city halls. 3, the dynamics at the municipal level and the response to the legislation from the municipal level. And then finally, where could we still use a little bit of government support to help execute and stand up Bill 109 as an industry? And if we have time and sort of bridging to that, we'll talk a little bit of around some strategies, if we have time, just to sort of bridge that gap to help us get there. So those are our 4 themes. To help us set the stage and unpack the legislation, we're joined today by 4, including Andy, real estate industry leaders and individuals who we think can speak best to this issue, because they've either been members of or advised to the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force. So first we have Dave Wilkes, who is the president and CEO of Build. Dave, would you like to just take 30 seconds, introduce yourself really quickly?
I think you did most of it right there, Chris. So yes, Wilkes, CEO of Building Industry and Land Development Association. And as Chris indicated, one of the roles I've played recently is a member of the Housing Affordability Task Force, along with Julie. So very pleased to be here and always enjoy these conversations.
Thanks, Dave. So next up is Julie Dilorenzo, founder and president of Mirabella Development Corporation. Julie?
Yes, I've been a developer for 40 years. I think I've almost seen everything. I've seen those 18% interest rates, and I've seen purchasers not show up at sales centers. But there's a very sophisticated, better educated industry right now, and very optimistic.
Thanks, Julie. And then finally, Luca Bucci, who's now the new CEO of the Ontario New Home Builders Association. Luca, in a not that distant past life, was chief of staff for the Ontario Housing Minister, Stephen Clark. Luca?
Good morning. My name is Luca. I'm the CEO of the Ontario Home Builders Association, and you're exactly right. During the Bill 109 process and the Housing Affordability Task Force process, I was the chief of staff to Minister Clark, and those 2 issues essentially dominated my life for a better part of half a year. So happy to be here today.
Thanks very much, Luca. So I think everyone in the audience, you can agree with me that we've put together a pretty stellar panel who can really speak intimately to this issue. So we'll get started. I'm going to ask you, Luca, to start us off by setting the stage, and just at a I'm sure everyone out there knows at a high level, just give them a quick reminder on why we're having this conversation today.
Yeah, so in particular, Bill 109 was really the government's first attempt to deal with a lot of the processing issues that surrounded development. If we look back to the pandemic, the issue of housing affordability really became a dominant issue on the political agenda, primarily because people were leaving the cities to go buy homes. And what we found was that there wasn't enough supply in the areas where they wanted to buy homes. And as we were looking at reasons as to why that was, we were really finding that it was a process piece that was really delaying a lot of the new homes coming online. Before Bill 109, the government did a remarkable job of trying to address the land availability issue, redefining the growth plan, setting new parameters for the MCR process. And what we were hearing from stakeholders at the time as we were approaching Bill 109 is we really needed to make an attempt to deal with the processing issues, the delays builders were experiencing with municipalities, the delays builders were experiencing getting basically with supply chain. But it was not going to be an easy task, because in an election year, when you are putting together a piece of legislation that's going to fix processes that a lot of municipalities were using for years over years, we really just needed to make sure that we were hitting the right notes, which is why the minister thought it was in the province's best interest to strike the Housing Affordability Task Force, to present a series of solutions that were free of political motive, that could really focus on the issue of process and housing supply. Bill 109 probably could have been a little bit more ambitious in its mandate, but I think both the premier and the minister understood that this is a big problem, and there really was no one-size-fits-all solution, and they committed to using the task force recommendations as a blueprint in future legislations to really tackle the issue of supply as it comes from a process perspective. So that's a very, very high level. I'm happy to get into a bit more detail as we continue the discussion, but Bill 109 was really the first attempt by the government to address a lot of these processing issues that have been restricting supply.
That's excellent, Luca. Thank you. I'm looking at the time. We're sitting at 11:20 thereabouts, and we always aim to have a wrap up by noon. So we're going to start with the themes. And the control room behind the scenes here is going to be a little bit upset with me because I'm making it open forum today, and as opposed to less question and answer. So Leanne and Carol, try and manage that camera a little bit. Theme 1: current state, supply chain, and inflationary pressures. Julie and Andy, I'm going to ask the two of you to kick us off, take the lead, but Dave and Luca, chime in when you see fit. So no question, really, where are we? And so Julie, Andy, what do we need to do around this?
I'd love to start with it. I always point out that we haven't had a major innovation in our industry since the flying form system. And that's pretty shocking, because that came about in the early 70s, and that vastly increased productivity. Now, does that mean that the industry has no productivity left in it? I don't believe that to be the case. I just think because it is an industry dominated by so many players, as opposed to automobile that has 3 or 4, we don't really consolidate in terms of our ideation. So we're proposing that the industry begins open source sharing in terms of delivery of product, open source sharing in terms of innovation of assemblies. We can't simply revert to someone says, oh, it's going to be all precast, or it's all going to be factory based. That may be an idea, but we need to have a runway for those ideas, and we need the Ministry of Industry to also work with our industry to bring about those solutions. In terms of supply chain, it really took a bit more planning to mitigate. We had appliance problems. We bought them early and stored them. It's an industry that maybe had just become just in time type of mentality. We can't do the just-in-time mentality anymore. We need to plan well in advance in terms of productivity, like one would do in a factory.
And what about how much those appliances are starting to cost, right? With the inflation issues on construction costs overall. I mean, Julie, you're just finishing up a couple of major projects, right?
Well, we definitely have seen price increases. Met with some cost analysts last week. We don't see there's a lot of softening in the near term. So this is what's a paradox of what's going on. The government increases rates because they want to deal with inflation, but a lot of the tenders that are in place were already negotiated and last for the next couple of years. So you won't see any cost mitigation, if there is any at all, available in the trades for at least 18 months. And even then, we just saw a round of justified labor increases. We just saw a round our potential round of municipal charges increasing, and people haven't even noticed the processing charges that have increased. So will we see increased costs in our industry? I believe that it's going to be very difficult to mitigate that, except for in the land price. So you'll start to see peripheral locations becoming potentially first choice for developers and for consumers. And when I say periphery, I don't mean with any disrespect. I'm very proud to now have bought a site in Barrie. We will be mitigating the affordability situation by looking at satellite opportunities where land prices are less, because the inputs on construction are pretty consistent.
So that's an interesting segue, thanks, Julie, to land issues, and maybe there isn't as much pressure there. Andy, maybe you can speak to that. Like, where do you think we're going to be going with land
Well,
value?
let me take it back to young Andrew as a young planner in one of the first graduating classes of the planning school of University of Waterloo, and we were taught under the British system of homogeneity. In other words, we were pushed and taught into community development that segregated certain density component parts within any community, so that our whole thinking was single family housing went into this neighborhood, semi-detached and townhouses went into that neighborhood, medium density began to occur on the fringes, and we do high density around the exterior community boundary. One of the great lessons that we've learned, because it's already happened here within Toronto, is some of our fabulous urban centers are a mixed form of density. I only can think, and I've used this as an example many times of Rosedale, of how it as one of the most expensive properties of real estate in the country, but driven by location. But its mix of housing form on the street is remarkable. Tribute was one of the first to mix singles, semis, and towns together with mid-rise apartment buildings in the beach community almost 15 to 20 years ago. And we tended to lose that and became more homogeneity like in our development process in suburban markets. So we need to be able to look at these new suburban developments. And it's in the suburban 905 area where density must not only increase, but where in fact we can find the answer to supply. It's not necessarily all intensification, but it's a mild intensification and a better mix. The yellow belt's another one. The yellow belt of exclusionary zoning is a big monster in the room. And that's something that has to be dealt with in many, many municipalities. It'll be a big fight. I don't know where the province will stand on this one, but they'll get a lot of pushback. But it's the right thing to do, because we can create greater densities in a, let me call it medium to lower density form that will provide tremendous housing opportunities in many of our existing communities, as well as the 905 outreach.
Andy, I just wanted to make a note. There's a fantastic example in Toronto where the Yellow Belt development has done really well. At Yonge and Eglinton, all those streets such as Erskine, et cetera, were low-rise houses. They were large enough lots, and the city was visionary enough to allow high densities on public transit on mid-block. So there are examples where it's done very, very successfully.
I think you're dead on there. And there's many around our city. I mean, Toronto has this, we like to sort of look over our shoulder sometimes, not so much look forward. And you'll see great neighborhoods from Yonge Eglinton to Rosedale to the Annex, where you've got this blending and mix of housing form that's happened over 150 years. It's not like it's just suddenly there. It's really already around us. And if we can transform that to suburban development, we've got a great answer in increasing densities and supply. Because the increase of supply at this moment in time, I don't think it has an impact on the raw material land other than to stabilize the price. It won't necessarily, we can't do it fast enough or large enough or you know, with such shock that we would actually move a price point of land raw material downward. It might slightly, but it'll stabilize, and it needs to stabilize for the next decade in order to get the supply side out there and bring, as incomes rise over the next 5 to 6 years, bring them back in line with a more stable long-term price.
So, you know, Andy, Julie mentioned that, you know, she's proud to say that you know, they're going to be embarking on a project up in Barrie with some development land up there. Is there any advice that you have based on our knowledge of the GTA and Southern Ontario market? Where do you think that, you know, there could be some opportunities to buy land to maybe help shield or protect yourself from the inflation. And where are the land deals, if any?
So are you asking Andy, or would you like me
Andy,
to?
sorry, Andy.
Sure.
Julie, anyone?
Well, Julie, go, Julie, go.
Well, I would say my family says I'm a terrible driver because I drive like this through every single neighborhood. There's so many wonderful neighborhoods that have just remained undeveloped because we seem to do things as lemmings sometimes. You know, one developer goes into Bay and Davenport, and they actually said that wasn't Yorkville when I bought it, and then everybody piles in. So, you know, there's fantastic areas along Lawrence that have incredible subway infrastructure that are longing to be intensified, that are still reasonable. They're just within the city itself. And then, of course, there's satellite cities that have great city halls that were developed in the last 20 years that have good infrastructure and really enthusiastic planning departments.
I think Bill 109 is a fantastic start. It's a great a shot at the process in the system. I remember in the early 90s recession, as we had an opposite problem. We had an enormous supply, but we couldn't get product to the market. We couldn't get through the final stages of approval. And the province appointed an ombudsman who became kind of an arm's length from the minister. It maybe was the early MZO, maybe that was for a part of the game, but it allowed the political side to stand independent of getting the process moving. It might be something to bring back, that the ombudsman role was very, very effective, and maybe allows the Minister of Housing not to have to impose on a municipality, but a almost ambassador that works with the municipality and the province to bring forward lands that are caught for whatever reason in this stagnated process.
You know, and Andy, I want you to come back to that one when we dive into the municipal issues. We're going to move into theme 2, which is talent. And I'm going to call on Dave to add to the conversation as well. But like I said in the opener, you know, we're dealing with a talent gap at all levels. It's not just construction. We've heard about trade, the trades, the issue with the lack of trades that are coming up through the ranks. And we've known about that for some time, and it's coming now. But also, you know, just in general, you know, think about, I used this example earlier today when I was on the phone with Julie, like you try and find geotech consultants now. And what about the staffing right at the planning desk? So what do you guys think? Andy, Dave, Julie? Someone start. Dave.
Thank you. So if I may just use this opportunity before talking to the question of talent, Chris, with your permission, I just want to comment on a couple of other themes very briefly. I think what Bill 109 did, as Luca summarized it, it signaled a change. And it was a change that we all need in culture in order to recognize that we have a supply problem. And it was the beginning of the process of solutions. So from an industry perspective, and I think also from a municipality perspective, I really do believe it signaled that there's a new sheriff in town, as it were, to use an old phrase, and that at times yesterday's solutions wouldn't solve today's problems. So I commend the government for that. And I think that was a big indicator. And on a land perspective, what we've seen the market dictate land. And we saw throughout the pandemic where people were driving till they qualify. Build and indeed OHBA had done a research with Mike Moffat from the Smart Prosperity Institute, where we were seeing that people were driving to area communities such as Guelph, Coburg, et cetera, to purchase land, to purchase homes, because land values were less there. And I think that is a big message for the market that, you know, the consumer, there is not an inelasticity on what they're able to afford. And I think that they do vote with their feet, or in this case, their cars when they drove, which may not be the best thing for our competitiveness moving forward. So I have a caution for us all that, you know, I think as Andy indicated, supply has been defined as the problem. We need to get past that conversation now and really begin looking at solutions. And I think 109 was the beginning of that. and the market is telling us that there's great urgency to do so. So if I just may add that context. And then with talent, you're right, there's two real talent issues. One, the actual building and construction. And I think there needs to be a concentrated focus around immigration and ensuring that our immigration system favors trade workers and those with skills in order to get buildings built. I think we need to, I'm going to use this word a lot today, a culture change around the value of trade jobs. You make a lot of good money being a tradesperson. And I really think that, you know, the dinner time conversation that families have needs to recognize those values and encouraging young people to get into the trades. We do have a retirement issue staring at us, where a number of the people, like all sectors, quite frankly, as the baby boomers move through, we are going to have a shortage that we need to address. So that would be one component. And another component that we don't talk about a lot is the trades at the planning departments. So I'll just use the City of Toronto as an example, where I think there is 10 or 12, I don't know the number precisely, so please don't quote me on that, Chris. Planners have left. It clogs the system. And I think there needs to be a recognition within municipal governments that the planners are vital to the system. No change of rules will be effective unless we have the people to administer the work. And you know, the reality of it is the industry pays for those planners through their fees. And so we need to make sure that there's proper staffing, but it's just not enough to have enough people. We need to make sure that there's rigor around the fact that they get the job done, and there's performance measures around those. So I would address it from those two components and offer those ideas to get it solved.
Thanks very much, Dave. Julie, do you have any examples or stories from the front line in having to deal with this talent crisis?
Yeah. In terms of talent gap, absolutely. I mean, we make a point of bringing in younger people, but even if I wanted to employ people from, for example, the Faculty of Engineering, they're all pretty much settled in jobs very early on. So there's not a lot of people trained that are available to our industry. Should we be looking at immigration that directly correlates with the needs of the industry? Absolutely. I also want to correct when people talk about bringing in skilled workers. When you bring in workers, they have to be trained here. So training programs have to be here on the ground. There are no skilled workers that know the flying form system. It's the only one of the places in the world that uses it. There are no skilled workers that understand our mechanical systems. That's a fallacy. We need to train people on the ground, and we need government to help us with those programs and those incentives. Young people, you say about the trades. I was really proud to be chair of Skills Canada. I can't even remember if it was 15 years ago. And I was amazed at how the rest of the world looks at the skills so honorably and with such enormous respect. I was at almost like an Olympic-like competition where flags of Great Britain from the trades showed up and flags of other countries. And in fact, Great Britain, France, and Italy were quite dominant, and Germany, in their apprenticeship style programs for the trades. How do we make that more appealing, Andy? You're absolutely right. It's not just the remuneration, it's the feeling of being a contributor to something that's so fundamentally important to society's well-being, housing, and it's a fundamental infrastructure. We had 8 young kids coming to our site last week for safety training. They're summer students, but the satisfaction that people felt when they put their vests on and saw the tangible product that everybody was contributing to was quite amazing. I think it's just a gap of knowledge that's not bringing more people into our business.
You know, there's something about that. I always, over the years, have said, you know, on my side, on our side of the business, where I don't really talk to the trades very often, but, you know, in my world, that influence of, you know, get out of bed every morning and jump out knowing that you are part of creating a roof to put over people's heads and be proud of it. And if this isn't something that gets you going, maybe you're not in the right work, right? So, Andy, anything on that? Luca, before we move into theme number 3?
Just that the immigration is a federal responsibility. Here we are with Luca's great work in delivering Bill 109, which was really provincial to municipal. But immigration is a federal responsibility, so that we need to look at the point system, how it's allocated. Right now, it is completely antithetical to the trades worldwide. Even if they could come here and get training, they just can't qualify under our current system. It's so skewered to the professional level. So that it needs to change. We need to work with the federal government here to recognize that that is a very, very important change in direction, critical to the long term. If we're going to do the 150,000 units a year target, how the heck are we ever going to build them? Whether it's a mix of high rise or low rise, we've got to outreach around the world and change our immigration policies to encourage that. Even those, I love Julie's idea on the training side. It's critical. You know, you forget it just doesn't show up, off the plane or the boat and suddenly is qualified. There needs to be an apprenticeship program here that supports a change in the immigration rules at the federal level.
The only thing I would add, this has been a very GTA centric conversation, which is great. But the further away we get from the GTA, the more magnified, the issues in skill deficits become. I was just talking to some of our members out in Halliburton who, want to build more, and they have a pretty cooperative, municipal structure that allows them to build more, but they just can't get people to the job site. I mean, they just don't have that capacity. There's not enough supply of labor there. And, when we talk a lot about immigration, we talk a lot about training. More often than not, when people do immigrate to Ontario, they tend to stay around the GTA. And, a lot of those resources get taken up, and rightfully so, by a lot of people in our industry who operate within the GTA. So the government really, whether it's the federal, provincial government, really needs to focus on solutions that also speak to the needs of those outside the GTA, because it is a substantial problems in areas outside of the 905 and 416.
Thank you, Luca. It's very good. To everyone in the audience, please send in your questions using the Q&A buttons, and we will try and get to them either as we go or at the end. And I think one of the questions that was posed, Luca, you spoke to that very well. Thank you. We're going to move to 3. And Luca, I'm going to ask you to stay on camera now to talk a little bit with Dave about what needs to happen at city halls across the province. And then Andy, Julie, chime in to backfill as we go. Luca?
Sure. I in my experience, bridging from the ministry to here, there's been a lot of apprehension, I think, at city halls to embrace a lot of the policies of the province. We had a great conversation about land supply in the GTA, and I think we got to recognize that a city like Toronto is used to dealing with issues that balance density and expansion, right? But as soon as you bridge out to some of the areas outside who are now really being faced for the first time with an influx of home buyers, they are really looking at how do they strike, I guess, the right balance of density and expansion. And a lot of the times, instead of embracing policies to use white belt lands and bring them into their urban boundary, they are being a little bit resistant. And I think those are politically motivated phenomenon. And I think it comes from a lack of understanding about just how important, the right balance between density and expansion is, particularly in areas like Hamilton, London, and Ottawa. I think you're starting to see a lot of these municipal councillors making decisions that aren't necessarily the most pro-housing in focus or the most pro-growth in focus. And I even think some of the backlash to Bill 109, you're starting to see a lot of municipalities in and around the GTA responding to things like the fee restructure or the fee refund program that was part of Bill 109 by increasing fees and other aspects of developments to make up for the loss, right? So they're really not embracing, I guess, the kind of spirit and mandate that Bill 109 and a lot of the previous pieces of legislation that the government brought forward in its previous mandate, which I think speaks to the fact that both the minister and the premier wanted to bring municipalities along with them in the process, and why a lot of the more, we'll call it ambitious solutions in the task force report were not implemented. Because I think both the premier and the minister, in their very politically astute wisdom, understood that this is not something you can just force on municipalities because they're not going to take up the call to action. So as we go through various different iterations of housing legislations with this government, and they have committed to bring in a new piece of legislation every year of this mandate, it is going to be really key for the ministry to work with municipalities to help them understand the true genesis of what they're trying to do, so you don't get these kind of adverse reactions to provincial policies for various different reasons which are inherently political in nature.
We need them as partners. You talked about them, being open and receptive. We're far from that, in that we need to form a partnership between the municipalities, the province, and the industry.
That's correct. And there's
Andy, anything to add on this? Julie, Dave?
So, I agree with Luca, surprisingly. That was meant to be a joke. So, municipalities have a track record of not supporting growth, and Luca inventoried some of them. I would add in the City of Toronto's inclusionary zoning policies as well. The disappointing in some cases response to the refund policy that 109 included, where they just talked about opportunities to come up the machinery or not accept applications, and so the clock doesn't start on the days within the provincial guidelines. Land availability through MCRs. Government looks at our industry as a bit of an ATM with their growth funding tools. They're all the challenges. Where I have seen a bit of a change, and I say this with great caution, on some municipalities where they recognize change is coming. Most recent decision that was announced by the City of Toronto around parkland fees remaining stable for a period of time, and consultations continuing on that. We've seen some regional municipalities look at expanding their urban boundaries to accommodate growth. I think there's a growing recognition that IZ needs to be restructured so that it's a societal responsibility, not just an industry's responsibility, and taking a hard look at the way the City of Toronto went forward. And we're seeing that in other municipalities, whether it's London, which both Luca and I are aware of, or Mississauga. So Chris, your point about being a partner is accurate. I think municipalities need to change faster, if I'm being candid. And I think where the provincial government can play a real key role is in continuing to encourage that change through the annual legislative initiatives that it takes, ensuring that it's a tripartite group with province, municipalities, and industry. We all need to be part of this solution, and I'm really going to speak a lot about that and advocating for it. And then I also think there needs to be a guard against policies that are not aligned with provincial priorities. And I think there needs to be some sort of oversight wherever that is, to ensure that if politically motivated decisions don't facilitate the necessary growth that the province is envisioning and anticipating, that we need to have a tool as a society to address that. So I think there needs to be faster change, and I will commend those that are looking at change, everything from process improvements like the City of Toronto has begun with their C2K initiative, to use another example. There needs to be oversight, and there needs to be, we can't silo anymore. We can't treat each other like adversaries. We need to treat each other like collaborators.
Going back to a partnership. We're getting some great questions coming in from the audience, and I
just add one little piece to that.
Sure.
I think just a quick. In my years, it's been a money issue. It's about finance. It's about municipal finance and their process, and how infrastructure is financed, how a municipality is financed. And the more punitive a municipality makes a bylaw or legislative process like inclusionary zoning, the more punitive it is to the industry, the less likely they're going to fall in line. But the opposite is also true for the municipality. The more punitive we make it to the municipality, the more resistance you're going to get. So think incentive. Think always in terms of change for supply incentive. How can we incentivize the municipality to come along with a theory of improving densities in certain areas, or structure of the process of infrastructure? Think an incentive, not a punitive process, and to both sides of the table. And that will cause a tremendous change in attitude.
Right. And so I'm going to build on that, Chris, and I know I'm jumping in without being invited. I think we need to take a look at municipal financing overall. I think there needs to be a new approach to the way cities are financed, whatever that looks like. I don't have, but I think that is a real big question. I think right now, Andy, the punitive measures, and I don't even think they're punitive. The measures to encourage compliance to existing guidelines and existing timeframes within 109 is just pay for performance. And I think that the signal that provided was there needs to be change. And so I agree with the carrot and stick. approach. The task force certainly talked a lot about that, but I think there is a much bigger question on the way we finance cities and how we do, because there's only real two tools right now: property tax and the growth funding tools.
And there's a great opportunity in front of us right now. The federal government has made $4 billion available to fix municipal processes. I mean, tie that to housing starts. Tie that to housing starts. You know, the more that you build, the more that you prove that you can build, the more money you're going to get. I know there has been some conversations between the province and the federal government along those same lines. So, and I think both Dave and Andrew made a good point. Governments have just given municipalities, I don't want to say blank checks, but municipalities ask for more money. Often than not, government gives them the money without any kind of substantial KPIs or any kind of accountability, particularly when it comes to matters of planning and housing. So maybe there's an opportunity now to use this new fund from the federal government and whatever kind of matching from the provincial government would come up with, if they do come up with one, and tie that to key KPIs like housing starts, or even, processing timelines. You process X amount of permits in a year, will unlock this amount of money for you to improve your planning processes. So there's an opportunity there.
Or invest in digital approvals, right? So incent that. Sorry, Chris, somewhere along the line you lost control, but I'll stop.
I'd like to add a few points if you don't mind. I don't want us to lose focus on the process after construction. I'm spending forever waiting for registration. At the high point of borrowing, it's $2 million per project on the type of loan that I've got on one project alone. You think that doesn't affect cost, but it just goes into this big pot that we have to actually then forward to someone. So unfortunately, the processing throughout the process, not just getting units approved, but getting units from construction to registration is unnecessarily long. The second thing is, just like the province issued, and the feds also give them credit, a policy statement that referred to the importance of housing. I haven't seen that from the municipalities. And so until the mentality changes and we see a positive, constructive mandate, a policy statement from municipalities that housing has to be a priority, I scratch my head. Can they not see that nurses can't work in downtown Toronto because they can't live in downtown Toronto? Can they not see that if we don't provide the housing, the infrastructure for the rest of the municipality starts to suffer? So housing should be a priority across the board, not just at the federal level, not just at the provincial level, but I'd like to see it as a policy statement and an objective, a mission statement at the municipal level.
Thank you. And Julie, what you've done here is you've segued really nicely into theme 4, which is what's next and what's missing, and where do we maybe need more government support at every level to execute and stand up Bill 109. So open dialogue. Julie, you can keep going, or maybe we'll bring Dave and Luca back into the conversation around what do we still need to get cracking on here.
Let me start, if I may, Chris.
Yep. Dave, then Luca, maybe.
Yeah. So what we can't do is have the current turbulence in the market that Andy talked about off the top. With rising interest rates, a bit of easing of demand. Although the latest numbers we released today with Altus has shown that price points haven't really adjusted, which I think demonstrates underlying supply challenges. We can't have I suspect we're going to see more project cancellations on the condo side if the rumors and speculation within the industry are true. We can't have any of that allow us to take our focus on the long-term issue of solving the supply issue and the focus of this conversation and the commitment that the provincial government has to do so. I love Julie's idea about a commitment at the municipal level to make housing our priority. And I think that's something we should be working with our municipal partners on. But what I really hope is next, and I'll be brief, is that we learn from history. In 2017, when the market eased because of the stress test, we didn't use it as an opportunity to fix supply. As the market gets turbulent, and I hope Andy and Bentel are correct, it'll be a short-term turbulence, that we don't get distracted by that and we keep focusing on the solutions that are available through the task force and implement them as quickly as possible. So that's what I believe must be next.
Luke, anything you want to add on that?
Just to take more of a broad level approach, I think you got to take the politics right out of planning. You got to look for ways to upload more significant planning decisions from councils to professional planners. Maybe even look at taking some of the planning policy capacity of municipalities and putting it back into the province, because with each municipality implementing its own planning policy, I mean, it does have the risk of becoming politicized and takes away from a focused solution on increasing supply and takes away capacity for planners to do, participate in the approval processes. So taking the politics out of planning is going to be key. And then the next thing is just trying to find a way to form that partnership. There is a very tense relationship between municipalities in the process when it comes to land use policy and land use issues. So, the minister and the premier taking the opportunity to articulate to municipalities that we're going to consult you in the industry before bringing in any of the more aggressive recommendations in the task force, I think is a step in the right direction. And I think the point that has been made on this call over and over again, like the municipalities have to demonstrate the same willingness to cooperate. Because without that cooperation, we're still going to be having the discussion in 5 years, and house prices will go from an average of around $1 million to maybe $2.5 million, because everything is just going to keep on increasing in price. So take the politics out of planning, strike that partnership, and allocate resources efficiently so that we can all focus on getting more supply online.
Just like we've had that conversation around the trades for the last 15 years in our industry. Going back to the municipalities, and a great comment question came in from Royce in the audience, and I'm just going to read it out, and I'll let one of the panelists sort of just jump on it. And it goes to the IZ issue. Changing inclusionary zoning, such as single detached only in existing neighborhoods going forward, will the province be doing anything more to support these changes, or will it leave it to the municipalities to navigate and figure out how to move forward?
So if I may, this was a question that not we anymore, that the government contemplated through the development of Bill 109. And there was at one point in time in the discussion where there was a pretty aggressive policy that was going to be implemented along these lines. And what we found in our research is that there are some instances where elements of that municipalities do have the authority to bring in elements of inclusionary zoning online. I think we've seen it in Toronto with laneway housing. And this was part of an initiative that was brought through one of the other pieces of legislation that the premier and the minister implemented early in the mandate. But there's municipalities like Simcoe County who have put in bylaws to fortify against elements of exclusionary zoning, and places like Halton that have done different kind of policy maneuvers to limit the amount of available housing in areas like their downtown core by moving the PMTSA up to the GO train station instead of downtown, the urban growth center from downtown to the GO train station. And I think that just speaks to the fact that a lot of municipalities aren't ready to have these conversations, despite the fact that in some capacity the province has given them some tools to start implementing some of these exclusionary zoning solutions in real time. And what the government was considering at that point in time was perhaps maybe changing that dynamic, instead of making it opt-in to opt-out, and providing rationales as to why you're opting out to this kind of framework. But it's going to be an interesting discussion for the governments to have with municipalities, and a discussion that the industry needs to be a part of, because now is the time to have that conversation. And I think, given the fact that it was a big part of the Liberal Party platform, it's a big part of the PC party's plan as part of their discussion paper around Bill 109. I do think you'll start to see more of these exclusionary zoning solutions being brought online, whether it's exclusively around transit areas or more deeper within their municipal boundaries. But I think after this mandate, there is going to be some sort of solution brought to the table.
Thank you. Julie, I'm going to go back. A couple of great comments and questions are coming in, and we're going back to the issue around the trades. And Gary made a comment along something like, I led the construction of, in the past, led the construction of 4 large trades training centers. Durham College in Whitby being the most recent. In Thunder Bay, we ran trades training 24 hours a day. Yes, with full-time unionized faculty. Is anyone advocating that anywhere else? And then part 2, or a question actually to that comment, is high schools do not promote trade programs. They should be addressed. What can we do about it? So Julie, Dave.
I always try and tell people I started as a trade and I'm a developer. I don't want people to look at trades as being one part of the job. First of all, you're self-employed. They don't really understand what that looks like. And I don't think we do a very good job at representing it. It's teamwork. It's being self-employed. It's building things that are fundamentally important to society. I haven't seen as much training as there was 15 or 16 years ago. I think it's just because we all got so busy and didn't invest the time. Ironically, if we were a big multinational corporation, we'd have a succession plan. And we've never really looked at what resources our industry needs. And maybe we can get Dave to help us with that and issue a report, what our industry needs, and deliver it to the government so the government can assist us with these training programs. I completely agree.
Thank you. Dave,
And
thoughts?
I think Julie's idea is a great one. What do we need as far as the type of labor force? I think the Durham example that Gary mentioned and you referenced is an excellent one that we can mimic. But there needs to be some bold thinking on this, and because right now we're stuck in the same treadmill, if you will, about complaining about this but not doing anything about it. So I think a succession plan for the industry would be a great start, and I think then that would be provide a similar type of roadmap that the Housing Affordability Task Force did around supply, land availability, and depoliticizing the system. So I'm going to frustrate the questioners with an answer that's not specific. And I think that's a challenge that we can no longer ignore.
I want to add some hopefulness to that, though. I spoke to the industries around the same time of supply chain. We've got some incredible Ontario-based industries, windows, precast. And when you speak to them, they say, can you increase your capacity? And they say, absolutely, yes. So we've got areas that have performed extremely well. It's predominantly in the labor area that we need to do a lot more work.
Right. And there's the modular forms for a single family now too, Joey. There is the beginning of innovation, and I think any increase in traditional materials will spur that. But right, I like your idea. We need a succession plan for the industry.
In innovation comes through adversity. Oftentimes we have never experienced great, creative, bold innovation without adversity. And we're entering into an adverse environment in our marketplace, and the opportunity to have greater innovation is there all around us at this very moment. I think of just one example from the king at Parliament, the king at Spadina, where zoning was removed in the middle 90s to take areas that were abandoned warehouses, almost unbelievable that you think of it today when you walk the streets of King and Parliament or King and Spadina. But zoning was removed, and the only restriction was building shade or sunshade areas. And the entire area was completely rejuvenated, both areas dramatically, to become, the entertainment district in one case and some great residential neighborhoods in the other. So it can be done. This industry, in every stage of its history, has found creative solutions when faced with adversity, and that's what we're in right now. And I think if we can find ways of moving that creativity forward quickly, that will be our great solution. There's a whole list under that affordability task force, by the way, that needs to be get it done. Somebody used that expression, get it done. I think that's the one.
Thank you, Andy. That's a great way to wrap this up. The one expression and to add on to that, the one thing that we say around the office, and I learned this from you, is pressure builds diamonds. So now's the time. I'd like to thank everyone on our panel for so many ideas. And you know what, this is a conversation we could keep going for another hour. So with that in mind, our firm PMA Brethour has put out a bit of a high level, almost like a Coles Notes version of Bill 109. And we're going to distribute that to everyone on this call. Just as a great one pager, high level layout of the bill and the issues surrounding it. Again, thank you everyone for your ideas, your insights, and a great conversation. I'm going to do our draw, and then we're going to wrap it up at 11:59. So, as always, our famous lunch draw, courtesy of CIBC. Our first winner is Chantel Smith from Mod Box. And then we have Phil Cavano from Rogers. And I'm super leader, we're going to do one extra one for good luck here. And finally, Natasha Rubin Copeland from TD. We'll probably see you tonight at the Build event, and Dave, and probably many people on this call. So grab us in the audience, and we'll continue the chat during the cocktail hour. I'd like to thank CIBC, our title sponsor, and all of our sponsors, SR Law, Balcony Bliss, My Design Studio. I actually had a tour there about 2-3 weeks ago. It's a great facility. If you're looking for a virtual or a temporary design studio solution, check them out. Sagen, Smart Touch, our friends over at Next Home, Buzz Home, Build, Aurea, Reliance, and Westmount Project. And a very special thank you to Leanne McEwitt and Carol King from McEwitt Partnership, who have been with us since that very first call that Leanne and I had through now almost 3 years ago when this all came down. So have a great afternoon. We'll see many of you tonight at Build, and we will see you again on this episode next time, just after Labor Day. So please, everyone, have a safe summer. Thank you very much for your support, and have a great afternoon.